Today is March 19th, 2015,
And you're listening to Periphery,
a podcast about human rights, social justice, politics, and culture in the Americas.
covering stories about people and groups on the periphery of society.
I'm Angelica Albaladejo.
And I'm Mike LaSousa.
Today on the program, we'll be featuring an interview with Jose Magaña-Salgado, an immigrant rights advocate here in Washington, D.C.
My name is Jose Magaña-Salgado, and I'm an immigration policy attorney for the Immigrant Legal Resource Center here in Washington, D.C., doing their regulatory and legislative advocacy for immigration.
Jose has an interesting story about how he got started on the path that brought him to the Immigrant Legal Resource Center.
In terms of my background, I am originally from Mexico, from Cuernavaca, Morelos, and I was actually brought to the United States when I was 2 years old. I grew up in Arizona, which is not the most immigrant-friendly states. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I was very fortunate to get a scholarship. Unfortunately, about midway through college, Arizona passed Proposition 300, which was basically this law that said if you are not supposed to be in the country, you can't pay in-state tuition, and you also can't have any public financial aid. So midway through college, I lost all of my financial aid and had to pay out-of-state tuition, and it was very difficult. But luckily for us, we were put into contact with lots of other individuals who were similarly undocumented. And as a result of that experience, we decided to organize, do advocacy on the ground, and fight for immigration and immigration-related issues.
Jose went on to form an organization now known as the Arizona DREAM Act Coalition, which is one of the largest DREAM Act advocacy groups in the U.S. This experience helped inspire him to become a lawyer in order to work on immigration policy at the national level.
So before that, I was actually just a business management major making my way through college, and I don't think the impact of my status had hit me until that law passed. And so I was confronted with a reality that there were forces out there that made it very difficult, not only for me, but for members of my community. And I found that after organizing, I was very passionate about it, very passionate about making a positive change and helping other people in my situation. So I knew that that is what I wanted to do moving forward. I wanted to work with organizations who were helping immigrants and Latinos on the national level.
Jose said that his experience as a grassroots organizer helps to inform his national level advocacy on immigration issues.
He highlighted how important it is to keep in mind the difference between what communities on the ground are asking for and what they need, versus what politicians and lobbyists in Washington think they need.
As an advocate, it's your job to elevate those priorities and make sure that they have a voice at the table.
Jose says the most pressing issue on the immigration policy front is the overcriminalization of immigrants. While many immigrant groups face discrimination in the U.S., according to the Pew Research Center, roughly 80% of the undocumented immigrants living in the United States are of Latin American or Caribbean origin. Roughly half of all documented immigrants living in the U.S. also come from this region. Existing stereotypes of Latinos as illegals or lawbreakers feed into the criminalization they experience in many U.S. communities.
When we have a framework that makes it more likely for people to be racially profiled, incarcerated, and convicted, you can't pass a law to provide them relief that is contingent on them not having any contact with the law enforcement system. Things like individuals with DUI convictions or gang associations, once you drill down into those issues, you realize that it's really not as clear-cut as you think. When the administration says things like felons, not families, it overlooks the fact that an abundance of people may have old convictions from 20 to 30 years ago that may disqualify them for relief. But those individuals have rehabilitated. They have formed connections here in the country, and removing them would frustrate the goal of family unity that this administration and Congress has said is paramount.
Even for those without any kind of criminal record, applying for legal status as an undocumented immigrant can often be as difficult and dangerous as living in the shadows.
Our immigration system is a system of laws layered on old laws, layered on old laws that may not necessarily reflect today's reality. When you throw in the fact that there is a philosophical hesitancy to welcoming the other or people from other cultures, you have a system that has a lot of shortcomings and as a result has led to a population of 11 million undocumented immigrants in the nation, a system that turns away individuals with valid refugee or humanitarian claims, a system that virtually everyone agrees is broken.
Jose mentioned that even as a trained attorney with years of experience working on immigration law, even he occasionally struggles with the legal complexities of the system.
And once again, Jose has experienced firsthand how this nonsensical system impacts average people and families.
We have a situation where millions of people have someone that can sponsor them under our existing family system, but because a collateral set of laws exists, they can't leave the country or else they're barred from coming back 10 years. So when you have inherent catch-22s like that are statutorily codified, I think that's just a symptom of just how broken our immigration framework is. When we have individuals like my mother who have lived here for 25 years, who still cannot apply for status even though they have 2 U.S. citizen children here. When we have individuals like the Dreamers who were brought here at an early age, many of whom are college educated or have jobs now, and even those that aren't, all of those people deserve an opportunity to apply for relief, but they can't.
While there are some U.S. laws and programs that allow immigrants to apply for legal status and refugees to apply for asylum, it can be hard for these individuals to take advantage of these provisions, considering their complexity and limited scope.
According to U.S. Customs and Immigration Services, it can take between 5 and 10 years for even lawful permanent residents of the U.S. to obtain naturalized citizenship. Undocumented immigrants, especially those from Mexico and Central America, are often fast-tracked through the deportation process.
Often, while waiting for their cases to work their way through the system, migrants and refugees are treated like criminals. Entire families are sometimes held in dehumanizing, prison-like conditions at detention centers around the country. According to the ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project, the U.S. is currently holding around 33,000 non-citizens in federal detention facilities. Just last month, frustrations over the poor detention conditions and alleged mistreatment of detainees boiled over into a 2-day uprising at the privately run Willacy County Correctional Center in Rabensville, Texas, one of 13 for-profit criminal alien requirement prisons nationwide, described by the ACLU as shadow facilities characterized by shocking mistreatment and abusive conditions.
In light of the unaccompanied minor crisis, the administration took a series of, some would say, harsh responses, especially in regards to family detention, a practice that for the most part had been eradicated for the United States. So you have women and children being sent to facilities that resemble prisons, individuals who may have come to this country seeking humanitarian or asylum relief under our laws. And instead of welcoming them, instead of providing them with those due process protections, we put them in these horrid conditions where we deny bond and make it very harsh for them to be in this country, in the hopes that once they are deported, that serves as a sort of deterrent effect.
This deterrent effect is an explicit policy of the Obama administration. Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson expressly stated that detention centers are part of the strategy to show migrants they will be apprehended, detained, and deported.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection has gone as far as paying an American advertising agency to create a pop song about the dangers of riding the freight train known as La Bestia, as part of a multi-million-dollar propaganda campaign intended to deter migrants from making the perilous journey from Central America through Mexico. Here's a clip of the song, which became popular on Central American radio stations last year.
Migrantes de todas partes se atrincheran entre los rieles, muy lejos de donde vienen, más lejos de a donde van. Esperan el temblar de la tierra, el chillido de las ruedas, aparece tras la montaña, amenazadora serpiente. De acero son sus escamas, también de acero es su vientre. La bestia del sur le llama.
The song may be catchy, but these types of campaigns are often built upon dehumanizing treatment of immigrants, and they don't address the many factors that push people to leave their home countries, as Jose explains.
Immigration often has factors that extend beyond our borders. very few people are coming here because they think our immigration system is favorable. Rather, oftentimes they are fleeing persecution or violence in their home countries. We've seen that with Central America. We've seen the fact that asylum and humanitarian claims have increased everywhere, not just the United States. And that signals that people are being pushed from their countries, not being lured here. I think a really good quote that I heard the other day was, children don't migrate, they flee. And I think once we recognize that, the United States will be in a better position to deal with this issue.
Many migrants cite violence in their home country as their main reason for leaving. However, their criminalized status in the U.S. often results in further violence against these individuals after they've reached their destination.
In addition to systemic issues of migrant detention and mass incarceration, which disproportionately affect individuals from minority communities, especially those of Hispanic descent, widespread discrimination against Latinos across the United States has created tensions at the local level. Undocumented immigrants often avoid interacting with local police for fear they will be deported. This makes immigrant communities more vulnerable, as crimes committed against those without legal status often go unreported.
So in terms of community trust, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And that is mainly because in the past few years, especially during the Bush administration, we saw an increase of state and local law enforcement enforcing immigration laws. And when that happens, those communities don't feel as safe or as comfortable with community policing.
Stereotypes of Latinos as illegals and lawbreakers permeate many communities, at times resulting in deadly violence. According to a nationwide survey from last year, more than 2 in 3 Latinos fear the police will use excessive force against them. In the last 2 months, at least 3 undocumented Mexican immigrants, who had been living in the United States for years, were shot and killed by local police officers.
The police killings of Antonio Zambrano Montes in Pasco, Washington, Ruben Garcia Villalpando in Grapevine, Texas, and Ernesto Javier Canepa Diaz in Santa Ana, California, have brought attention to a history of excessive use of force by police officers against Latinos, and have created mounting pressure from the Hispanic community for thorough investigations into these fatal police shootings.
I think there's a lot of intersection within minority communities in terms of the fear of law enforcement authorities, whether it's Ferguson, whether it's shootings at the border. Unless that community trust is fostered, I think it's going to be harder for individuals to be able to feel safe and welcome in their community. And the best way to make a safe community is to be part of that community and not antagonize it through racial profiling or violence or excessive criminalization.
Obtaining some form of legal status would likely help protect immigrants from some of the worst consequences of this overcriminalization. One step in this direction is the executive action announced by Obama last November, which will provide temporary protection from deportation to about 5 million of the 11 million undocumented immigrants currently living in the U.S.
Overall, what the administration did was a welcome change and a step forward. It's the biggest immigration development since 1986.
However, this action can be reversed by any future president at any time and is limited in scope. Also, many structural issues will continue to confront undocumented migrants in their attempts to gain legal status in the U.S.
Executive action has its limits. These individuals will be able to obtain 3-year grants of employment authorization, maybe leave the country. But for many who have lived here for decades, they won't be able to apply for lawful permanent residency or citizenship. What we have now is one of the largest second-class citizenry that the United States has ever had. When you have 11 million people that can't participate in the political process but are an integral part of this economy, that is inherently unsustainable. And I think right now we're working to implement the administration's executive actions, but at the same time we're keeping our eyes toward legislative action in the future.
In order to apply for deferred action under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals and Deferred Action for Parents of Americans in Lawful Permanent Residence programs, better known as DACA and DAPA, immigrants are expected to retrieve and submit documents that are often difficult to obtain.
These programs require that you submit stacks of paperwork to make sure that you're eligible. And for many individuals who have worked in the underground community who may not have paycheck stubs, who may not have those employment records, who may have stayed at home while their spouse worked, we need to make sure that there's a flexible policy so they can come forward. One of the biggest problems we had with deferred action for childhood arrivals was someone was 100% eligible, they met all the criteria, but they didn't have the evidence to prove it, that they entered the country before a specific time or that they were in the country continuously. So we want to make sure that criteria is flexible.
There is an incredible backlog of Freedom of Information Act or FOIA requests by immigrants for documents from U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
So recently a coalition of organizations, including the National Immigration Project, filed a lawsuit against Customs and Border Patrol in order to try to obtain faster expedited processing for FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. And that is because CBP has historically been reticent to release this information, oftentimes under the guise of national security.
Additionally, U.S. immigration laws are complicated and difficult to navigate without access to a lawyer, but fewer than 1 in 5 people charged with immigration violations are represented by counsel. The remote locations of detention centers, the high cost of legal services, and the relative lack of lawyers working on immigration issues all make it difficult for immigrants to obtain competent representation.
While these are major challenges facing immigrants and activists, groups like the one Jose works for have been working to provide resources for immigrants and communities to help them help themselves.
So the Immigrant Legal Resource Center prepares a wide variety of materials for practitioners in order to help people apply for a wide variety of legal and immigration benefits. Additionally, we provide a wide variety of free legal advisories so people understand whether their client is eligible. We have a significant presence in the Bay Area in California as well, and we provide lots of free and pro bono resources on that end. Ultimately, for those of you that work with the community, there's been a lot of confusion, especially regarding the lawsuit that temporarily enjoined the program. We are encouraging people to continue to collect their records with the understanding that one day soon they will be able to apply for this program and that they shouldn't be afraid that this is a temporary stoppage, but at the end of the day, they're going to need to apply. They should, and it's the best path forward.
Many groups, including the ILRC, have also begun to work with government agencies to make sure immigrants can fairly, safely, and successfully navigate the legal process.
Most of the work we're doing is administrative in terms of implementing the executive actions. And that basically means working with the Department of Homeland Security to spell out exactly what the form is going to look like, what the eligibility criteria, when you really drill down, is going to look like. What is a gang associate? What is a conviction? So we regularly work with DHS to make sure that relief is inclusive as possible. And so right now, our number one priority is making sure that that relief is broad by providing a sort of discretion and allowing DHS to look at these case-by-case situations where someone may not technically be eligible for relief, but they have a wide variety of positive equities. Maybe they're the pastor in their local community. They have 3 U.S. citizen children. They've been here 25 years. Someone like that should be able to stay in the country. Additionally, we want to work to make sure that there are strong confidentiality protections. And basically what that means is if you're an immigrant and you submit your application to the Department of Homeland Security, you want to make sure that that's not referred to its enforcement arms, because you want to make sure that you won't be deported. A strong confidentiality policy is critical to encourage people to apply and make sure that this program is successful. We also want to make sure that it is affordable and that it is flexible in terms of the documentary evidence.
As we mentioned earlier, the executive action taken by the Obama administration last fall is not a permanent solution.
Deferred action is literally just a legal term that means we're going to deport you, but you're not at the top of our list. And so we need something more permanent for our community, where they shouldn't be second-class citizens, where they should one day get the ability to be able to travel freely, be able to vote, be able to be part of this community. So for now, It's the successful implementation of the president's executive actions, and long-term, its incorporation into the broader American culture.
In recent years, a number of national-level figures have helped lend a human face to this issue. Here, Jose mentions the story of Jose Antonio Vargas, the journalist who came out as an undocumented immigrant in 2011 and has since become perhaps the most prominent national voice fighting for immigration reform.
I think a decade ago there was substantially more fear in people coming out about their status, talking about the fact that they were undocumented. Because for most people, you're taught by your parents to always be quiet about your status and not bring a lot of attention to yourself. What we've seen in the last decade is a reversal of that. DREAM Act activists who have become more bold and who have realized that publicity doesn't hurt them, but rather helps them. So now it's a sort of badge of pride to come out. And I think Jose Antonio Vargas, who I know personally, has done a lot of really great work around that because he has provided a sort of national voice, a sympathetic story, and the way he approaches things is very, very diplomatic. He will get these angry, horrible Twitter messages, and he'll just respond and say, I love you, let's talk about this, let's connect. And I really admire that because when it comes to the immigration debate, it can get very, very ugly very, very quickly. And we need people like Jose Antonio Vargas to elevate that debate, to make sure that we recognize that there is an actual person at the end of these immigration policies. And people like Jose demonstrate that once someone gets to know a victim of these immigration policies, they are substantially more sympathetic. And they say, oh, I never realized that this was affecting someone like you. Of course I want you to stay in the country. And I think the use of people's stories is very critical. I think at the same time we should acknowledge too that not everyone is a valedictorian from high school that's going to go to college. And even if they're not, then that doesn't mean that they shouldn't stay in the country. So I think it was a good first step to get immigrants in the door by kind of showcasing these stories, but at the same time, there is a very diverse population with different stories and different narratives. And that doesn't mean that they don't deserve to be in the country and given an opportunity to be part of the fabric of this nation as well.
While there are many obstacles that still need to be overcome, there are also some signs of hope.
I think we face a unique circumstance where maybe many politicians don't really have a diverse enough constituency, so they don't really have a reason to address this issue. But at the same time, we're seeing rampant demographic change that's going to make it so that immigration reform is definitely not a question of if, but when.
We want to thank Jose for taking the time to explain these issues to us. We're planning to do more coverage of immigration issues in the future, especially focusing on the militarization of the border and the expansion of immigrant detention facilities in recent years.
On peripherypodcast.com, you can find more information about Jose Magaña-Salgado and the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, as well as links to the sources used for today's show.
Make sure you follow us on Twitter at periphery_, like us on Facebook, and check out our blog where we post new episodes and updates about the show. Periphery is now available for subscription. Just search for us in the iTunes store.
Thanks for listening.
Migrantes de todas partes se atrincheran entre los rieles, muy lejos de donde vienen, más lejos de a dónde van. Esperan el temblar de la tierra, el chillido de las ruedas, aparece tras la montaña, amenazadora serpiente. De acero son sus escamas, también de acero es su vientre. La bestia del sur le llama al maldito tren de la muerte, con el diablo en la caldera, grita, ruge y se retuerce. Colgados en los vagones de la serpiente de acero, van migrantes como reses en camino al matadero, la ruta del infierno entre humos de dolores. Este trueno que estremece no conoce de favores, lleva 36 tatuados en sus ruedas y su frente. La bestia del sur le llama al maldito tren de la muerte, con el diablo en la caldera, grita, ruge y se retuerce. Renomara salvatrucha, quincena de coyotes, un frutero que machaca, un machete que desgaja. La bestia del sur le llama al maldito tren de la muerte, con el diablo en la caldera, grita, ruge y se retuerce. La bestia del sur le llama al maldito tren de la muerte, con el diablo en la caldera, grita, ruge y se retuerce. La bestia del sur le llama al maldito tren de la muerte, con el diablo en la caldera, grita, ruge y se retuerce.